live once again. How are you doing, Angela?
Whew, I am okay. Yes, I'm doing great, thank you.
Woo sums it up, right?
Yeah, Woo sums it up. Yes, up to the wire here today. But I'm
I
glad I
know,
made
I
it.
know.
It's nice when that light bulb goes off. Um, I was head down working, and I was just like, oh, like literal
Mhm.
gasp. Like it was, you could hear it. You could definitely hear it. But yes, I'm glad I'm here. I'm ready to talk about chapter 4. It looks like we're getting down and dirty with
We are
AWS Lambda, right?
indeed,
I
indeed.
agree.
Yeah, and if you're new to the pod or if you're joining us again, welcome. We're talking about programming AWS Lambda. That's the book.
That's what
It's really a Java book disguised as a AWS Lambda book, but that's okay.
say that again.
We're gonna we're gonna let them slide on that. And this week we are talking about chapter 4,
Mhm.
operating AWS Lambda functions. They went into some pretty interesting parts of the whole Lambda, I guess, development, deployment, and operation lifecycle. Um, from the packaging, infrastructure as code, permissions, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, that's what we're talking about today.
Yes, very, very exciting stuff. So, caveat, none of us, either of us, are Java
Yeah.
programmers. So, we are taking this book with very fresh eyes, very unaware eyes, but we're doing our
Mhm.
best. Lambda, yes, I think I
All
know
day.
Mike has been all up in Lambda. Me, yes, in projects or whatever, not for work, yet. And I say that because I foresee it in my future,
Okay.
again, real soon. But anyway, operating AWS Lambda functions, that is chapter 4. And this chapter digs into a more advanced way of building packages and packaging Java functions up in a way that they can be deployed via Lambda. A lot of details on using the SAM tool, which we used
Mhm.
in the previous chapter to package, and how Lambda functions and serverless apps uh, really work to enforce principle of least privilege,
Yeah.
which is what we should all be doing. It's very easy to go in and just say, let me just give it all the permissions that it needs to
Mhm.
do what it needs to do, when you should be much more precise as to only giving the permissions that are needed to do the job that it needs to do. If a function is not going to reference another service, why would you give it the keys to the kingdom, right?
Why?
Yeah, right. So that's literally chapter 4, but it breaks it down.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, and I was gonna say we could jump right in at the beginning where they talked about where they talk about assembling the zip file. Of
Mhm.
course, it's very Java specific where they talk about the different classes and
Yes.
how these classes have files that they might have in common. And if you package it a certain way, you're going to overwrite, or you have the
Yes.
potential to overwrite files from another class. So the example that they give, class A, class B, they both have a properties file. And if you unzip it at the top level, class A, class B, that properties file is going to be overwritten by one or the other. So you
And you
never
don't
know
know.
whose properties, yeah, you're getting at the end of the day. So they gave
And
you
this
a better approach to pack things up.
Yeah, so it does give you a better approach. And what the approach that he's referring to is called an Uber jar, where it
Mhm.
it, it kind of it contains the program, its dependencies, the what the web application needs to be executed. So it's a jar file with all of the dependencies baked in. Um, and what he said, they can just unpack and start writing over each other. And there was something else about packaging up um, uh, jar files where, yes, it will allow for you to upload a jar, but it prefers for you to upload a zip. Um,
Mhm.
and zip versus jar. There was a short conversation on that. Um, because I'm not a Java person, I was like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense." And then, of course, you're reading
Yeah.
me examples here, but consider not using Uber jars for real world
Yeah.
applications.
And so one of the things that I kind of took away from this as a Pythonista,
Yes,
using
you are.
Python for my Lambda functions, um, I don't really recall scenarios where projects ran into that problem because we have the requirements file, which is very similar to the POM XML that
Yeah.
Java uses, defines all the dependencies. We run pip install -r requirements, and we get the requirements installed wherever they need to be installed, and there's really no overlap to that location or to those definitions. Like everything's pretty much self-contained as far as to go. Now if you have multiple functions with different requirements, then of course you're gonna, or rather I should say multiple, yeah, multiple, say like Python scripts with different functions or different requirements that you're trying to deploy into the same function, you might run into some problems. And I believe that's maybe what they're trying to describe with these
Mm,
Java classes.
okay.
But typically with Python, it's like all of your functions and classes are defined together, and then all the requirements are bundled together in one file. So you don't have to worry too much about this overwriting one thing that the other thing needs. Everything is pretty much, uh, you know, already kind of walled off for you as needed.
And I'm sure there are other programming languages that use Lambda. They might
Mhm.
have to deal with this in their own language, or they may not. They may be as simple as writing Python uh, Lambda functions, but
Mhm.
somebody would have to tell us, like, what is it in
Yeah.
Go or what is it in another language? I'd be curious
Mhm.
to see that, but
Yeah.
yeah, I'd be curious.
Yeah, because they went into all this detail about this very specific Java problem, but not
Yes.
necessarily how this affects other languages or what the workarounds are, et cetera, et cetera. So, but again, Java book disguised as a Lambda book.
You can say that one more time. This is basically just a Java book.
Yeah, yeah. God bless them for it. But okay, moving on.
Moving on. Oh, a quick aside. So
Yes.
I'll be attending DevOps Days Atlanta at the end of the
Okay.
month. And uh, John Willis, one of the co-writers
Yes.
of
The
DevOps
DevOps
Handbook,
handbook.
will be there.
Awesome.
Very random, I know, but I pulled up the page earlier and I was like, I have to make sure that I tell Mike that I might meet this gentleman.
Yeah.
I might meet him at DevOps Days Atlanta. So,
Yeah, take your book and get him to sign it. I got mine signed when he came to visit my workplace
oh,
many, many years ago. Yeah, he gave
oh,
a talk and I got my
oh,
book signed.
done, done. I'll carry it in my purse. I'll have it with
Yeah.
me. Okay, now back to operating AWS Lambda function.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Well, the next thing I wanted to jump into, they have a very small aside on deploying functions.
Hmm.
They talk about the console. You can just upload your zip file directly. SAM CLI, which we're using, AWS CLI, which is kind of prolific. You know, it's all over the place. You can install it different ways and just use your credentials and the AWS CLI to deploy stuff. CDK, which I haven't really used very much at all, but it's like infrastructure as code with AWS libraries baked into the language that you're used to using. So it works with Node, Python, Java, of course,
Hmm.
and I think they even have like Ruby and so on and so forth. You can just use the CDK in whatever language you want to use. Um, then they got these other frameworks, Amplify, Chalice. Some of these are, well, Chalice I think is older. Maybe I don't even know if it's maintained anymore. And then some of these, well, of course, CloudFormation, serverless, well,
Hmm.
CloudFormation, comma, and the serverless framework, which is a lot like SAM CLI, is its own little thing. Um, and then all the third-party stuff. But it did also go into infrastructure tools like Ansible and Terraform, which can be used to deploy Lambda functions as well. I'm all about using Terraform to build out the scaffolding, and then
Hmm.
using Ansible to actually deploy the stuff into it. That's
That is the
uh, uh,
one-two punch
yeah,
for
that's an approach I've used for years.
automation. I used to hear the conversations about, well, I'm using Terraform. What do I need Ansible for? Well,
A lot.
it really does help the lift. Terraform is exceptional for what it does, and that's building out the infrastructure. It's amazing at that. It's always the right tool for the right job, and the way that you just described it is basically, if you're, especially if you're deploying to a cloud or a private cloud, it Terraform has providers to deploy in different places, and AWS is just another destination that it does a really good
Mhm.
job at building out infrastructure. So why not have it deploy your Lambda functions, because it can.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a difference between deploying infrastructure and configuring software.
For
And
sure.
those tools are specialized for both of those tasks. Terraform for the infrastructure, Ansible for the configurations. So
What he just
yeah.
said. So yeah,
Welcome to my that concludes my
welcome
TED
to
talk.
his world.
Yeah.
So what do we got next? I know we talked about, you just mentioned infrastructure as
Yeah.
code.
Yeah. And I
When
think
we're
that bridge that they offered, like, hey, these are the ways that you can deploy.
Mhm.
Then, oh, by the way, this is kind of described as infrastructure as code. And then they transition to the cloud formation and serverless application model,
Yes.
because these SAM templates are basically next generation cloud formation templates. They're like a superset of cloud formation, to some extent, because a lot of the what I want to say, like parameters and the
Mhm.
descriptions and the, the tokens or whatever you want to describe the language that the SAM template is, it's a lot like CloudFormation. And I mean, so much so that the example that I got lined up for later on in our discussion,
Mhm.
I started with a CloudFormation template and really just kind of merged that into a SAM template. I had code embedded in it, and I took the code out per the SAM model and put it in a source directory. But
Okay.
a lot of the other stuff I just kind of left there. And I had to tweak a few things, but the cloud formation translated to serverless very easily. So I think they're just trying to offer that they're very closely tied together that way. Oh,
That's
and I
good.
guess I should say, conclude by saying SAM deploys cloud formation stacks as it is. So it's no surprise that those two modes or methods are very closely related.
It does make sense. It does make sense. What when are we go what do we want to talk about next? So we that was I mean, of course it tells us about the SAM model, and how we use SAM deploy to go ahead and deploy the zip, and
Mhm.
they use this phrase, a reproducible build. And specifically for Java, I can see where it's a problem, because if you are your rebuilding your package, and a date changes, like say if you were in
Mm.
a CI/CD pipeline, and you push some code that had this very small change in it, it would trigger a rebuild when it wasn't really necessary. And Java does have, well, I don't even think it's Java. I think it's Maven that has a
Mhm.
plugin that'll forego I can't remember the name of the plugin, but
Mm.
it says
I
don't.
know the one you're talking about.
Gosh, I had it in here somewhere. I have a
It
lot of
is
notes.
reproducible build dash, well, reproducible dash build dash maven dash plugin.
There you go. That's the name of the
Yeah.
plugin. And you put it in your POM XML file. So when you rebuild the package, the hash on the package stays the same. So it doesn't kick
Mm.
off any new build. So very smart. Very interesting, especially if you're a Java programmer and you're getting into Lambda, and it's like, hey, what is
Yeah.
this? Well, Maven has a plugin that removes sources of non-determinism. That's
Yeah.
the very wordy mouthful that they use.
Exactly. And I ran into this reproducible build problem with my Python, but I think it might have just been operator error, because I
Okay.
was changing my code, and from the get-go, I changed my code, I did SAM build, got the build artifacts, I did SAM deploy, it deployed the thing, ran into some problems, so I was like, let me iterate. I changed the code, did SAM deploy, and it's like, hey, your stuff hasn't changed. And I was like, what do you mean? I changed the code, and I just it like spun my wheels on that for a minute. Then I was like, oh wait, I have to run SAM build again so that I,
Oh,
so that I update the build artifact so it
yes.
knows that there's something there. I had even gone so far as to use a switch. SAM deploy has a switch force upload so that it forces it to upload the template even if there are no changes. And I
Okay.
was still getting errors, and I was like, I know I fixed this thing. And of course, I did not build it after I fixed the thing. So once I got that figured out, hey, everything was good. I was golden.
Okay. That's a small error. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
especially if you're doing things over and over, you can't. That's why that we have automation. But when you're doing things over and
exactly.
over, you can skip that one step. It's just a command you forgot to run.
Yeah. Now, I should say that I was doing all of this on my local system. If I had a CI/CD pipeline where I was making changes and pushing the code, then I definitely would have had a step in the pipeline that would say, "Hey, SAM build, SAM deploy." It would have known the steps that it needed to do. I would have programmed it to do the steps that it needed to do. But here I am, human, a problem between chair and keyboard, total operator error, just doing the wrong thing. So, and I mean, I don't even want to talk about how long I've been in the game, but
Hey,
this,
it
all that it
happens.
say, yeah, is like if you're new to this stuff and you run into problems where like, oh man, I forgot to rebuild and I ran into this error. I spent an hour trying to figure it out. Happens to the best of us. So don't get down on yourself.
Very sage advice. Very sage
Mm,
advice from a
no
seasoned
doubt.
professional.
Yeah, yeah.
And I meant that in the nicest way possible.
I know, and I was thinking, like lemon pepper, sage, or like, basil.
Well, I'm in Atlanta, so it's lemon pepper everything.
I know.
That's the only seasoning combination that matters down here. So you're very
That's what's up.
seasoned.
That's what's up.
All right, there was a
Cool,
huge
cool.
section on security.
There
And this is
was.
where it talked more about principle of least privilege and IAM inside of AWS and the roles and policies and Lambda resource policies, aka function policies.
Yep.
Um, Sam has a IAM, and when I kept reading it, Sam IAM, it just
Mhm.
felt like green eggs and ham every time my eyes would hit the page. Um, and that's pretty much it. But let's dig into security.
Yeah, no doubt. I appreciate that they did talk about the granularity of IAM. And like to reiterate the point that you made earlier, a lot of times when people are developing functions, particularly if they're new to AWS, they will, say, oh, I need to give this entity permission to access this other entity. So allow allow this thing to do everything to this other thing, when really you don't need to give that much agency to anything. Just about, maybe you as a person, as an admin logging into your account, sure, do everything, do it carefully. But to this server that needs to read an S3 bucket, why do you need to let it read every single S3 bucket in your account? You need to limit those um, permissions. And you can get even so far, they don't go into this much detail, but you can get very, very granular with the IAM permissions, even to the point where like, this access can only be allowed if it's coming from this IP address
Yep,
range, or if
very
it's
much
coming
so.
from, this particular security group, or, like it's got so much like capability built into it that you can really dial in the permissions that you want to offer.
And I think it's a great exercise. Instead of doing, allow and service star or whatever, something star,
Hmm.
S3 star. I think it's a great exercise to go through the policies and see what's in there and understand what is available. I think that's always a
Hmm.
good idea. Like even if I'm, building out a policy to do something and not even Lambda specific, but I want to see what's in here. Well, I know I need to list. I know I need to be able,
Hmm.
you think about what exactly do I need this thing to do? And you go through this little exercise in your head. And if you're wrong, well, you can tweak it or whatever. Usually
Hmm.
there's an error message that tells you don't have permissions to do it. It
Yep.
might even just give you that little policy line in the
Yep.
error message. I've seen that as well. And I'm like, oh, let me go back. So I say all that to say is reading through the available policies and you might just be able to figure it out on your own, as
Yeah.
opposed to, even like I'm saying, you may not know the granularity. You may not know. It's just easier just to do star, but that's a teachable moment, in my opinion.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, yeah. So I'm glad they covered that for sure.
Yeah,
And it also ties into the infrastructure as code part, because with SAM, and it's basically infrastructure as code at that point, where you're creating other resources within AWS
a stack.
along with your function. Yeah, it's like you've got your stack of resources, and oh, by the way, I'm going to add a function to it.
Yep,
So they go through like creating the IAM roles, the IAM policies, attaching it to your function, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think that was a real, and you're right, they did spend quite a bit of time talking about security, but security is important, right?
it is.
It's
It is.
it's key to the whole get down in this internet day and age. So you really have to put some emphasis on being secure, specifically with the resources that you deploy and that you operate.
Fantastic. I think, is there anything else? I mean, I did Sam I am, but that's basically
No, I mean, I didn't have too much more to discuss. I did have a demonstration. I had some code to share.
that
Um,
sounds
I
great.
I walked through kind of my own exercise of my own design. I didn't necessarily go through the exercises that the authors listed in the book, but I made sure that they were all germane to the discussion that we're
Very
having
good.
today. So it's got some principal least privileges. I'm doing roles and policies with IAM, and I'm showing how I'm using those policies to access parameters in AWS from my function. So
Fantastic.
without further ado, I say let's get right into it. I need to update my screen just a little bit
Okay.
so that I can get to the screen that I want to share. All
Well,
right.
while he's oh,
No, go ahead. Say what you're going to
no,
say.
I was going to say, well, while he's doing that, I was going to talk a little bit about what we're covering next week, which is building serverless applications. So this is
Mm,
really pre-gaming for the rest of the book. This, like, put security first, understand creating roles and policies that allow your functions to do XYZ before you get into the meat of the book. So I'm glad they put this part so far in the beginning. Yeah, that's it.
yeah.
That's all I wanted to say.
All righty. Yeah, we'll definitely be getting into that. The code that I'm sharing is available in the GitHub repo, github.com/cover the code. If you go there, you'll find the repo for season 2.
Awesome.
And this particular, on the screen, if you're watching this in video format, the screen says chapter 5, operating AWS Lambda functions. That is a typo. That should be chapter 4, operating AWS Lambda functions. So by the time you get to the GitHub repo and
It
see
will
that,
be fixed.
that will be, yeah, it'll be cleaned up.
Okay,
Uh,
awesome.
all right. So getting into what this demonstration does, I've got an application. It's a Python application that generates some HTML. And if you were with us for the last episode, I actually use this very same function to get values from the environment, the Lambda execution environment, specifically the environment where the function was operating. So I had two functions. One was for staging and one was for production. So I've updated this function to also take an additional parameter from its environment. And this parameter is actually a path to a location in AWS parameter store.
Okay.
So what I'm actually allowing or instructing the function to do is to take that parameter that I'm passing to you and then use that parameter as a path to get some data from SSM. So on this particular line that I'm showing on the screen, I'm using the SSM library or SSM client from Boto3, the Boto3 Python library, and I'm using the get parameter command. But to do that, this function needs permission to access SSM, and that's where the IAM roles come into play, and policies and permissions and so on. So this is my SAM template, and what I actually have in here is this is it's an IAM role, and I'm attaching to this role a policy that allows SSM parameter access. So to the point of principles of least privilege, I'm not doing SSM star. I'm not allowing, any function that has this role or policy attached to read any parameter whatsoever. I'm being very specific in saying this is allowing them to get parameters, but just these two parameters, project slash staging slash resource data, or project slash production slash resource data. So if you're one of those functions, staging or production, you can read the parameters that are outlined, and that's it. You can't do anything more. So that's how it looks in the template. And once this gets deployed, then this is how it looks in AWS. We get the execution role, the policy is attached, and it just, again, it's pretty much the same thing that the code has, that the template has. It's just kind of spelled out in the AWS platform. So if I go to Systems Manager, this is the, right now what I'm showing on the screen is the production parameter. So it's /project /production /resource data. And the value in here is just production _01. I just threw some random data in here. But what the Lambda function will do, if it's successful, it will read this parameter, capture this value, production 01, and then put it on the web page that it displays. So sure enough, everything works as intended. After some struggle, of course, with getting my template in place and making sure everything was good, I'm able to generate this web page where this value, where it says this is the production environment, this value, production, is being read from the environment. And so then you may recall the function reads the parameter path from the environment, uses that path to go to parameter store to get the value production 01 from that location. And so it does print the data out on the web page. And so, yeah, that just kind of walks through a lot of the points that we discussed today. Getting your code together as far as the template goes, infrastructure as code, and creating those resources, using IAM to create roles and policies, and then also using least privileges to make sure that access is dialed into only the things that need to be accessed from the thing that needs to access them.
What he said.
And as a result, this is what we get.
And your example, like you said, it checked all the boxes. And I think it was a great example that really just says, this is what it means when it says. So you're only accessing what you have the permissions to access, and using the principle of least privilege. It showed you what a role looked like with the policies applied. I think I said that backwards. Yes,
it's all
role
the same.
With the policies applied. And I think that was I think that was great. I have nothing else to say. There's a lot more. So like we said, we're not Java people, but the opportunity to kind of read what Lambda is requiring, what it is doing, that overview of security. If we can go back to when a Lambda function is invoked, they gave a really good example of between your API gateway and your Lambda function and your DynamoDB. And that's an example that uses multiple services. And again, being able to have that function do all the things that it needs to do and only have access to what it needs access to. It also says not everything, because we mentioned Lambda resource policies, aka function policies. Not every resource uses resource policies, which I thought was interesting. But this, we don't have a DynamoDB example, and neither does the book. The book is kind of like explaining that Lambda resource policies attach the IAM policy is attached to the Lambda function, and it defines who can invoke it or whatever. But that was really interesting. That I've just put a little line there that it doesn't use resource policies. So calls from anyone are permitted as long as their role permits it. So it's not it's not a gate that's open. It's just that this particular service does it this particular way. So there's still a policy involved.
And thanks for jogging that brain cell. I wanted to mention API gateways, and just like some of the experience that I've had using API gateways and Lambda functions, because I tell you, if you're doing this from scratch, if you're not using a framework or some sort of directed approach to attach an API gateway to Lambda function, one of the errors that you almost always run into is like permission denied, or you go to the route that you think is going to map to your Lambda function and it just doesn't work. And you just keep trying and trying and trying. I'm speaking from experience here, folks. And what happens is, what happens is the API gateway does not have permission to execute the function. So you have to go into the gateway configuration. It's not even the function's fault. It's the gateway's fault, because you haven't given, well, maybe it's the developer's fault. You haven't given that gateway permission to execute the function. So like these functions that I have deployed, the permissions are wide open. Anybody can click that link and the functions will run. But if I wanted to close that permission off and only give permission to a specific entity to run the function, then I have to very explicitly give that permission. And a lot of times what happens is people forget to give permission to the AWS gateway to run the function. And then you get errors and so on.
Very nice use case.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you find yourself on a podcast years later, explaining to people how they can avoid the errors that you made.
Sharing those gems. You had to make the mistake, so you can fast forward all these years later and share it with whoever's listening, and share it with me.
Yeah. Yeah. And here we are.
Much appreciated. So that was it. That was pretty much it. So the book summary, it talks about building and packaging. I talked about that in the beginning. Let's talk a little bit about it going a little bit further in chapter 5.
Oh, yep.
So yes. So I'm excited. Again, I'm just reading. I am internalizing. I am learning. I am not writing a lick of nothing. I don't have enough hours in a day to do any of it anymore. But this is very useful information if you plan on doing anything like this in AWS Lambda. It gives you the framework in which to do things properly and correctly. I know it's very Java focused, but to me, I think this chapter really just talked about the basics of, like, if you were doing Lambda, not a lot of specificity other than talking about the template file and the POM file, but how to secure. And that seemed very across the board for any type of programming language that you're writing your functions in. So yeah, I'm pretty excited for next week. Oh, wait, tell them, Michael.
What am I telling them?
Next week is what? On a Wednesday.
Oh, yes. So next week, our schedule is going to be slightly disrupted. If you're joining us on the live stream and you're so excited to join us on Tuesday evening or night or morning, whatever time it is in the world where you are, look for us 24 hours after that. We're going to be on Wednesday, our time, Wednesday evening, Angela's time, Wednesday afternoon, my time. So don't check for us on Tuesday, because you're going to be by yourself looking at LinkedIn or YouTube or X or wherever you're gathering this stream from. Yeah, we're gonna be here on Wednesday.
Yes. Well, this was fun. Again,
I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
I am really enjoying this as well. I think we have like maybe 5 more chapters after 5.
I think so. Yeah, so it would help if I had a schedule in front of me, but I don't.
Didn't you write a schedule?
I did. That's why I'm totally blaming myself here. But
I saw it once, and I did not internalize how many weeks we would be on this book. But it doesn't matter, because we're riding through this one together.
We're making it happen.
I'm keeping my eyes on this prize. Chapter 5 is next Wednesday. It's called Building Serverless Applications. A nice meaty chapter. We're going to get into that. After that, testing. Who said that?
I don't know. But testing can be fun, though. Testing is a lot of fun. And actually, what I'm not even going to say might. These days, thank you, AI, and all of the services that it provides, because I can say, hey, AI friend, here's my code, write a test suite for it. And guess what? Within minutes, I got the test suite. Bam. So when we get to testing, maybe we'll talk about prompt engineering too, or something.
Hello. That'll be a fun little twist, and that means no
Yep,
matter where you are, you can take a little bit of you can take some gems away from that one. So I'm looking
exactly.
forward to it. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming to Cover to Code, our little online book club that this is
Yep,
just definitely a passion project for us.
it is indeed.
Reading and talking, talking and reading. You can't beat
Yeah,
that.
I know, and we're happy to have you, the listener, the viewer, the
Yeah.
streamer, along with us for the ride. So thanks for being here.
All right. Until next week, we'll see you next Wednesday.
We'll see you soon. Bye.